Number 6. Paul Myrtle. Shortly after 10 p.m. on June the 7th of 2021, Alex Myrtle called 911 after discovering that his wife Maggie and son Paul had been shot at their family hunting lodge in Colleton County, South Carolina. Police officers were dispatched to the scene, where it was determined that both Maggie and Paul had already succumbed to multiple bullet wounds. The authorities officially confirmed the identities of the victims the following day and classified the incident as a double homicide. At the time of his death, 22-year-old Paul was facing criminal charges stemming from a 2019 accident that he'd allegedly caused by operating a boat while under the influence of alcohol. According to eyewitnesses, he'd been exhibiting erratic behavior, which those who knew him later attributed to his supposed drunk alter ego named Timmy. The temperature on the evening of the accident had reportedly reached lows of approximately 40 degrees Fahrenheit. In spite of the colder weather, Paul, who was purportedly overtaken by his volatile alter ego, stripped down to just his underwear. He also allegedly slapped his girlfriend before losing control of the boat and crashing it near Paris Island. One of the vessel's passengers, 19-year-old Mallory Beach, was thrown into the water upon impact. She would remain missing for about a week before a boater eventually discovered her dead body in a marshy area in Beaufort County. As a consequence of the fatal accident that had been precipitated by his intoxication, Paul was charged with boating under the influence, causing death. He was also the target of a civil lawsuit filed by Beach's family. As with the most recent updates on the matter, investigators were still pursuing various leads regarding who might have been responsible for Paul and Maggie's murder. Number 5. Stephen Griffiths. Susan Rushworth, an escort from Bradford, West Yorkshire, England, disappeared on June the 22nd of 2009. Two additional Bradford women, both of whom shared Rushworth's profession, went missing in April and May of the following year. On May the 24th, 3 days after the final disappearance, local police arrested 40-year-old Stephen Griffiths on suspicion of murdering the missing women. Although Rushworth's remains were never found, investigators discovered parts of the other two victims' bodies in the River Aire in Shipley, a civil parish located within the city of Bradford. Griffiths had previously been diagnosed as a schizoid psychopath after revealing to psychiatrists that he'd fantasized about becoming a serial killer. In 2009, he was admitted to a PhD program at the University of Bradford that centered on homicide studies. It was reported that the police had kept Griffiths under observation for 2 years before he ultimately carried out the 3 killings. While being interviewed by detectives, Griffiths detailed the morbid and gruesome nature of his crimes, claiming to have consumed the cooked flesh of his victims after their deaths. In a TV documentary titled Making a Monster, psychologist Dr. Eric Cullen made the claim that Griffiths' fragile ego had been irreparably damaged in the late 1990s. The mental fracture reportedly stemmed from his former girlfriend breaking up with him upon seeing his apartment, which was full of violent memorabilia and covered in plastic sheets. Dr. Cullen postulated that Griffiths had permanently isolated himself from other people when faced with his partner's rejection. Nicknamed the Crossbow Cannibal, Griffiths ultimately pleaded guilty to the murders and was consequently sentenced to life imprisonment. Number 4. David Albert Mitchell. On the morning of September the 12th of 2012, an elderly birdwatcher was accosted in the woods near Central Park's Strawberry Fields, one of the busiest areas encompassed by the New York City landmark. Days before the assault occurred, the victim had reportedly taken what was described as a compromising photograph of her eventual assailant. She later told investigators that the man, subsequently named as 42-year-old David Albert Mitchell, had unsuccessfully attempted to take away her camera and vehemently insisted that she delete the sensitive picture. Mitchell ambushed the 74-year-old woman the following week and forced himself upon her as a cruel form of retaliation. The victim would later reveal that during the assault he slammed her head into the ground and threatened to cut her throat. Upon his arrest, it emerged that Mitchell had faced criminal charges on multiple occasions throughout his adult life, including twice in which his alleged victims had been elderly women. Back in 2002, Mitchell had been a primary suspect in the murder investigation of a cleaning lady named Barbara Flake in Jenkins Jones, West Virginia. Local authorities determined that the woman had been killed by way of blunt force trauma to the head, and one of Mitchell's ex-girlfriends alleged that he'd bragged to her about committing the murder. Due to a lack of evidence, however, he was never formally charged in connection to the incident. Mitchell's half-brother Joe was interviewed by the New York Daily News in the wake of his 2012 arrest. Joe claimed that Mitchell wasn't directly responsible for his violent tendencies, insisting that his alter ego, Johnny, was the triggering factor of his unstable behavior. He also expressed his belief that Mitchell's internal rage would only worsen if he wasn't placed behind bars, and that failing to incarcerate his half-brother would inevitably lead to him perpetrating further acts of violence. In October of 2013, Mitchell pleaded guilty to his charges and was consequently sentenced to 30 years in prison. Number 3. Hakeem Oladipo. The police commissioner in Lagos, Nigeria, went to the Brooks estate in Magadu to meet with a strategic partner during a social gathering on January the 1st of 2022. Upon his arrival at about 6 p.m, Hakeem Oladipo was met by 4 private security guards at the estate's entrance. They reportedly attempted to aid the commissioner by providing him with directions, but their bid to assist him was mistaken for a refusal of entry, and Oladipo became outraged at the perceived insult. The commissioner then loudly declared that he was placing the private security personnel under arrest. Shortly thereafter, a woman passing by with her 3 children was arrested as well after she'd reportedly intervened in an attempt to make sense of the situation. Several estate executives and security agents subsequently converged at the estate gate, leading to a complete shutdown of the area that ultimately caused a 4-hour-long traffic jam on Magadu's CMD Road. In spite of pleas from the executives for the detained individuals to be released, Oladipo wouldn't soften his stance until approximately 11 p.m. when he allowed the security guards and the mother of 3, who it later emerged was also recently widowed, to go free. Oladipo's actions were widely condemned in the incident's aftermath, with many believing it was his damaged ego that had compelled him to lash out so belligerently. Today's topic was requested by DJ Rock. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Mohammed Hoka. On the evening of July the 10th of 2020, London resident Mohammed Hoka and an unidentified friend made their way into the Cross Harbour DLR metro station. They then encountered a group of 5 other individuals while walking up the steps to Platform 2. CCTV footage taken from the station showed that Hoka had begun talking with the other group shortly before 6 p.m. The interaction abruptly escalated and resulted in 22-year-old Hoka pulling a kitchen knife out of his fur coat, prompting the others to flee. Hoka chased after them, eventually catching up with 2 of the young men who'd run back down the stairs. He repeatedly attacked them with the blade, inflicting several stab wounds before they ultimately managed to escape. Hoka then fled the scene, leaving one of his victims, identified as Mohammed Samir Udin, critically injured from the attack. Samir's friends dragged his unresponsive body a short distance out of the station, where concerned members of the public tended to him while awaiting the arrival of paramedics. Despite the best efforts of bystanders and emergency medical personnel, Samir passed away at the scene. The other victim of Hoka's onslaught was taken to the hospital, where he underwent surgery for injuries he'd sustained to his back. 2 days after the incident, Hoka surrendered to local authorities, whereupon he was charged with murder and grievous bodily harm with intent. Investigators gathered from their interviews with the suspect that he'd never spoken to the victims prior to the day of the attack, and that he'd targeted them in a completely random act of violence. The judge presiding over the case's legal proceedings called Hoka spoiled, egotistical, and evil, expressing particular disgust towards the young man's refusal to show any semblance of remorse for his actions. The judge also claimed that because his only concern was escaping justice and not accepting responsibility for the life he'd taken, it was clear that Hoka's arrogance and egotism were deeply embedded traits that had been instilled in him when he was a child. Following a trial at Southwark Crown Court, Hoka was sentenced to a minimum prison term of 27 years. Number 1. Miranda Barbour. On November the 11th of 2013, Miranda Barbour went to the Susquehanna Valley Mall parking lot in Hummel's Wharf, Pennsylvania, to meet up with an individual to whom she'd talked on Craigslist. The 19-year-old had allegedly agreed to have intimate relations with the person, a middle-aged man identified as Troy the Ferrara, in exchange for money. After meeting in the lot, the pair drove 6 miles to the city of Sunbury. At some point, Barbour and her husband, Elite, who'd been hiding under a blanket in the back seat, viciously attacked LaFerrara. The couple allegedly wrapped a cord around the man's neck before Barbour fatally stabbed him 20 times. The following day, LaFerrara's body was found in a residential backyard in Sunbury, and local police quickly identified Barbour and her husband as being responsible for the murder. Although Barbour had initially claimed to have acted in self-defense when she stabbed the victim, the couple confessed to premeditating the killing as the investigation progressed. As detailed in an arrest affidavit, Elite told detectives he and Barbour had chosen to murder LaFerrara at random, claiming that they'd been motivated by the sheer excitement of committing an act of violence. In a subsequent interview with a Sunbury newspaper, Barbour stated that she'd murdered at least 22 people across the United States between 2008 and 2013 while being controlled by her self-described satanic alter ego named Super Miranda. The shocking claims caused the story to be picked up by news outlets all around the world, although investigators reported that they'd found no evidence to substantiate Barbour's unprompted confession. In September of 2014, both she and her husband were sentenced to life in prison without parole in connection to LaFerrara's murder. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have a crazed alter ego or be unable to move faster than a brisk walk? Let us know in the comments section below.